The skies over Zenith Colony burned crimson as the first wave of alien ships descended. Families scattered like frightened animals, clutching their loved ones and meager belongings. The Evans family ran towards the evacuation point, their young daughter, Lily, crying as she clung to her mother. Her father shouted over the chaos, promising her safety, even as the alien soldiers closed in. They weren't soldiers in the human sense, taller than any man, their limbs bent unnaturally, and their skin shimmered like liquid metal. Their eyes glowed with a predatory intensity, devoid of mercy. Blaster fire rained down indiscriminately, turning streets into craters and buildings into collapsing infernos. The air smelled of scorched metal and burning flesh. The Evans family almost made it to the ship before the soldiers reached them. Lily's screams were drowned out by a single, terrible flash of light. The entire family disintegrated in an instant, leaving nothing behind but ash. The massacre lasted hours. When it ended, Zenith Colony was a graveyard. Survivors, those unlucky enough to live through the attack, huddled in shelters, recounting the horrors to government officials. One man sobbed, his voice breaking as he described how the aliens rounded up civilians and executed them like livestock. Another survivor stared blankly at the floor, her hands trembling as she muttered, "They killed my baby. They laughed while they did it." Humanity's rage boiled over. These were not the acts of conquerors but butchers. In a dimly lit chamber aboard a military station orbiting Earth, two figures stood apart from the bustle of strategists and soldiers. Talia and Cain were legends in the shadows, known for achieving what others deemed impossible. Talia's movements were feline, precise, her dark eyes scanning every detail, while Cain stood solid as a fortress, his presence exuding quiet strength. Together, they had toppled criminal syndicates and ended insurgencies, but their legend came at a cost. Years ago, they had a daughter, their light in a universe darkened by war. She was taken from them in a conflict not unlike the one they now faced. That loss forged their bond into unbreakable steel. Cain focused his grief into action, becoming a master tactician and combat specialist. Talia channeled hers into cold precision, her gift for deception unmatched. Where Cain was a hammer, Talia was a scalpel, and together, they were humanity's deadliest weapon. Though professional in their demeanor, the pain in their eyes spoke volumes. This wasn't just another mission. It was personal. A uniformed officer entered, his face grim. "We've received intelligence about the alien leadership. The king and queen are more than figureheads. They are the architects of this war. Their elimination could cripple their empire's ability to retaliate." The officer displayed a hologram of the alien rulers. The king's imposing figure loomed, his metallic armor etched with intricate designs that spoke of a long reign of conquest. The queen's sharp features and piercing gaze exuded deadly intelligence. These were not merely leaders, they were the embodiment of the terror humanity faced. "Our intel suggests they're residing in their palace on their homeworld, Helios Prime. It's a fortress, surrounded by dense security and patrolled by elite guards. We need you two to infiltrate and terminate them both." Talia and Cain exchanged a glance. The task was monumental, the risks astronomical. But the images of Zenith's burning streets and the cries of the survivors still echoed in their minds. "Consider it done," Cain said, his voice like stone. The officer nodded, his expression softening for a moment. "I know what this means to you. The fate of countless lives depends on this mission. Bring them justice." As the couple prepared to leave, Talia placed her hand on Cain's shoulder. "We'll finish this," she said, her voice resolute. "For Lily," Cain replied, his eyes burning with determination. And with that they stepped into the void, ready to take the fight to the heart of the enemy. Helios Prime was nothing like the scorched earth colonies the couple had fought to protect. The atmosphere shimmered with a strange, refracted light, casting everything in shades of deep blue and violet. The landscape was alien in every sense, a sprawling metropolis carved into jagged cliffs, with bioluminescent plants clinging to the rock face, their light pulsating like the heartbeat of the planet. Towering spires twisted upward, their structures defying human logic, seemingly grown rather than built. Rivers of molten silver coursed through the city, reflecting the eerie glow of floating orbs that hovered high above, illuminating the bustling streets below. Talia and Kane stepped out from the shadows, their disguises impeccable. Nanotech implants altered their appearances, mimicking the glimmering, metallic skin of the alien populace. Their speech modules emitted the alien language fluently, though each word felt foreign on their tongues. The air was dense, tinged with a faint, metallic taste that Kane found oppressive but Talia ignored. Rumors of human retaliation had reached Helios Prime. Security forces, clad in shimmering armor that seemed alive, were stationed at every corner, their weapons humming with latent energy. Patrols moved with disciplined precision, scanning the crowds with devices that could detect irregularities in biology or behavior. The couple adjusted their movements to mimic the graceful, almost fluid strides of the aliens, their every step calculated to avoid drawing attention. In the marketplace, they mingled among the citizens, feigning interest in the wares. The stalls were laden with strange, glowing fruits and intricate devices that seemed to hum with a life of their own. Talia kept her voice low as she conversed with a merchant, gleaning snippets of information about palace security. Kane, meanwhile, observed the patrol routes, noting patterns in the guards' movements. An alien child brushed past them, its laugh echoing in the crowded square. For a brief moment, Talia froze. The child's innocence reminded her of Lily, and she fought to suppress the pang of grief that threatened to surface. Kane placed a reassuring hand on her back, a silent reminder to focus. Their interactions weren't without risk. A merchant scrutinized Kane too closely, his slitted eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Your accent, it's strange," he said, his tone sharp. Kane responded calmly, his voice tinged with feigned amusement. "I come from the outer clans. Our dialects are peculiar." The explanation was met with a skeptical glance, but the merchant eventually shrugged and returned to his wares. Not all the aliens were hostile, they discovered. A weary-looking elder spoke in hushed tones about the suffering the royal family's rule had brought to even their own kind. "The war has taken everything," she murmured, her eyes distant. "Perhaps it is time for the empire to fall." The couple's informant, a wiry alien with a thin, iridescent cloak, approached them in a dimly lit alley. He introduced himself as Corvin, a former palace worker who despised the royal family. "Their greed and cruelty will destroy us all," he said, his voice trembling with both fear and conviction. He handed Talia a small device. "This will disable the biometric locks on the palace gates. But be warned, once inside you are on your own." With the informant's help, they approached the palace under cover of darkness. The structure loomed above them, a monolith of black metal and glowing veins of energy that pulsed like a living organism. Guards patrolled its perimeter, their movements synchronized and unyielding. Talia activated the device, and the gate shimmered before flickering open with a soft hiss. They slipped inside, moving with practiced stealth through the labyrinthine corridors. The palace's interior was as alien as its exterior, with walls that seemed to shift and pulse in response to their presence. Each step was a gamble, the threat of detection omnipresent. At one point, a guard passed so close that Talia held her breath, her fingers tightening around the concealed blade at her side. But the guard moved on, oblivious to their presence. Kane led the way, his sharp eyes scanning for traps and hidden defenses. Corvin's directions proved accurate, guiding them to an access point that led deeper into the palace. But their informant had warned them of the dangers ahead, and as they descended further into the alien stronghold, the stakes grew impossibly higher. Their disguises and wits had brought them this far, but the real test was yet to come. The inner corridors of the palace were alive with defenses, as if the walls themselves were watching. Pulsing lights traced their movements, and the air hummed with a low, ominous frequency. Talia crouched low, her augmented lenses mapping out the security grid ahead. 2 sentries. Heat signatures suggest they're augmented, she whispered. Kane nodded, his hands tightening on the hilt of his plasma blade. They moved like shadows, weaving through laser grids that crisscrossed the hallway. Every step was calculated, every breath measured. A sudden click echoed, and Talia froze, her foot hovering over a pressure plate. With a sharp glance at Kane, She gestured for him to disarm it. He knelt swiftly, his fingers working with precision until the mechanism hissed and disengaged. Beyond the traps lay the elite guards. These were not the patrols they had evaded earlier, but towering warriors encased in reactive armor, their every movement an extension of their weaponry. Talia slipped behind one, her blade silently severing the links of his armor's neural network. He collapsed without a sound. Cain took the other with brutal efficiency, his strike a blur of light and force. The opulence of the palace contrasted starkly with its defenses. The walls glimmered with alien metals, etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift under the light. The air was thick with the scent of exotic oils, and the distant hum of machinery gave the space an eerie, almost sacred quality. At last, they reached the royal chamber. The grand doors slid open, revealing the alien king seated upon a throne of black stone, his figure radiating power. The queen stood beside him, her sharp features illuminated by the glow of a holographic map. Both turned to face their intruders, their expressions unreadable but charged with an almost primal intensity. The king rose, his voice a resonant growl. "Humans! Crawling into the heart of my empire like vermin!" His hand reached for a weapon that materialized from his armor, a massive blade that crackled with energy. Talia and Cain moved as one. Cain charged the king, his plasma blade clashing against the alien's weapon, sparks flying as their strengths collided. Talia darted toward the queen, her movements a blur as she aimed for vital points. The queen countered with a precision born of experience, her strikes calculated and lethal. The battle was brutal. Cain's strength and raw combat skill were matched by the king's sheer ferocity, each blow shaking the chamber. Talia's agility and precision were tested as the queen unleashed a flurry of attacks with a weapon that seemed to bend and twist like a serpent of energy. "You think we are monsters," the queen hissed as she parried a strike. "But your kind would burn our worlds to ash given the chance. This war is survival. You slaughtered innocents." Talia spat, her voice cold and unyielding. "Your survival doesn't justify genocide." The queen faltered for a moment, her expression hardening. "Perhaps not. But neither does yours." Cain landed a critical strike, his blade piercing through the king's defenses. The alien let out a guttural roar before collapsing, his massive frame hitting the floor with a resounding thud. The queen turned to see her fallen partner, a flicker of rage and despair crossing her face before she lunged at Talia in a final, desperate attack. Talia's blade found its mark, and the queen fell beside her king, her lifeblood pooling on the polished floor. As silence settled over the chamber, Talia and Cain allowed themselves a moment to breathe. Their victory was hard-won, but something was wrong. A faint sound drew their attention, a soft, trembling whimper. In the shadows, partially hidden behind the throne, a small figure emerged. The alien child was no more than 6 or 7 cycles old by human reckoning, its wide, luminescent eyes filled with terror. It clutched a small, ornate object, perhaps a toy or a symbol of comfort. Talia froze, her blade still in hand. Cain stepped forward, his expression hardening, but his movements slowed as he took in the sight. The child's gaze flicked between the two humans and the bodies of its parents, its small chest heaving with quiet sobs. "This wasn't part of the mission," Cain muttered, his voice low. Talia knelt, her weapon lowering. "It's a child, Cain. It's an heir," he countered, his tone steely. "If we leave it alive, the war doesn't end here. The cycle continues. And if we kill it, what does that make us?" Talia's voice cracked slightly, the memory of Lily flashing in her mind. She reached out a hand toward the child, who flinched but didn't retreat further. The silence stretched unbearably, the weight of the decision pressing down on both of them. Talia's hand hovered in the air, and Cain's grip on his blade tightened. Finally, Talia whispered, "We came here to end monsters. Don't let us become them." Cain's jaw clenched, his internal battle raging behind his eyes. After a long moment, he lowered his weapon. The child remained frozen, its wide eyes watching as the two humans turned and left the chamber, leaving behind the crumbled remains of its world. The alarms blared across the palace as the couple made their escape, every shadow a potential threat. The child's presence lingered in their minds, its luminescent eyes haunted Talia, while Cain struggled to reconcile their choice. The bodies of the alien king and queen lay behind them, symbols of a shattered regime. Yet, the decision they had made regarding the child weighed heavier than any death they had dealt. Talia glanced back as the chaos of their infiltration spread like wildfire. The palace's systems were failing, guards scrambling in disarray, their once immaculate coordination shattered by the loss of their leaders. The child's small frame hidden in the shadows of the royal chamber flashed briefly in her memory, its terror cutting deeper than any confrontation they had faced. "We did what we came to do," Cain muttered as they reached the outer walls, his tone firm but lacking conviction. "Did we?" Talia whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant sound of explosions. The bioluminescent skyline of Helios Prime seemed dimmer now, as if the planet itself mourned. They activated their extraction beacons and disappeared into the void, leaving the palace crumbling behind them. The alien empire, once a monolithic force, was now fractured, its future uncertain. Back aboard the human command vessel, the atmosphere was tense. The briefing room felt colder than usual as they stood before their superiors. The mission had been an undeniable success, yet the price was uncomfortably high. The officer who had sent them on this path looked over their report with a grim expression. "The assassination has triggered widespread unrest," he said. "Their empire is destabilizing, but that doesn't mean the war is over. If anything, it could become worse. The power vacuum could lead to chaos, or retaliation." Talia stared at the holographic map, her arms crossed. "We ended a warlord and a strategist. That's what we were asked to do. And the child?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Cain's face betrayed nothing, though his hands clenched at his sides. "We left the palace as ordered." The officer's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing more. Instead, he dismissed them with a curt nod. "Rest while you can. There's more to come." In their quarters, the silence between Talia and Cain was deafening. The weight of their actions pressed on them like a suffocating shroud. Talia sat by the viewport, watching the stars drift by, her mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. "We did what was necessary," Cain said finally, though even he didn't seem convinced. Talia turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Did we? Or did we just trade one monster for another? We've destabilized their world, killed their leaders, and left an orphan behind to remember it all. That child," Cain began, his voice faltering, "would have been a symbol. A rallying point for vengeance. And now it's a victim," Talia replied. "We've sown the seeds of something else. Revenge. War. A cycle we'll never escape." They sat in silence for a long time, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound. Talia rested her head against Cain's shoulder, the small gesture a lifeline in the vast, cold void of space. "What if it never ends?" she asked quietly. "What if all we've done is delay the inevitable?" "Then we fight," Cain said after a moment. "We fight to make sure there's something left worth fighting for." Talia closed her eyes, the image of the child's trembling form etched into her memory. She didn't know if they had done the right thing, but in the darkness of space, with Cain beside her, it was the only thing she could hold on to. Far away, on the ruins of Helios Prime, the alien child stepped out from the shadows of the royal chamber. Its small hands touched the cold stone where its parents had fallen, its luminescent eyes narrowing with a mixture of grief and something darker. The world around it was crumbling, yet it stood tall, a faint glow rising from its form. The cycle had not ended. It had merely begun anew.